LiberalViewer presents.
So it was one of the big pieces of misinformation that the Ferguson police put out real early was this videotape of Michael Brown stealing these cigarillos, like cigar type things from this convenience store and pushing a clerk out of the way. They call that a strong arm robbery because he used force to get out of the store with the cigarillos, apparently, although, that crime was never prosecuted. But this idea that Officer Darren Wilson knew about this strong arm robbery, this alleged strong arm robbery, at the time he was interacting with Michael Brown, that is really disputed in the testimony and was really uncross-examined by the prosecutors, as I'll show from actual transcripts from the grand jury after I show this clip of this Atlantic writer named Ta-Nehisi Coates talking about the stop and getting corrected by Nora O'Donnell on CBS's Face the Nation this morning here.
It's all good to begin the conversation at the point at which there's a lethal confrontation between Michael Brown and Officer Wilson, but why was Officer Wilson stopping Michael Brown for walking down the street? How did we get to that point? We have some pretty good studies on the amount of policing that's endured by African-American communities in Ferguson and how that relates to how
my understanding is that
surrounding counties fund themselves.
Yeah, Ta-Nehisi, my understanding, though, was that
Sure.
he had just received over the radio the report that there had been a robbery and there was a description of a suspect, and that when Michael Brown walked by, he fit that description, and that's why he stopped him on that particular case.
See, some of that's unclear. Officer Wilson
my
says
understanding was that he was
jury.
actually walking in the middle of the street, and he hadn't put that together yet.
Right.
Am I correct?
Well, there's confusion because Officer Wilson in the grand jury says he connects those two things. The chief of police of Ferguson actually did not connect those two things, and so this is why you have to have a transparent trial by jury. And I agree with Ta-Nehisi that we can't be too hopeful about change because of the structural things that are in place and the long, hard work that has to happen here. What Ta-Nehisi is talking about in terms of police stops and the bias in the system is thinking about how racial bias informs all these things.
So at least there was some correction. There was James Peterson there at the end, sort of doing a correction as to it being disputed as to whether Officer Darren Wilson knew that there had been this strong arm robbery at the Ferguson market before he had his interaction with Michael Brown. But one of the things I found in the transcript, and I put a link down to Volume 5 of the grand jury testimony transcript. You can look through this all yourself. I'm going to show you all the page numbers. The first is from page 52 of Volume 5. This is testimony of, they don't give his name, it's redacted. This is a sergeant for the Ferguson Police Department who's worked there for 38 years. He was the first police officer on the scene after Darren Wilson shot Michael Brown. One of the things I noticed in his testimony, here are a couple pages where this is the sergeant, unnamed sergeant from the Ferguson Police Department. First, here's page 52. You can see the question asked by the prosecutor, did he, this is Darren Wilson, talk about anything about stealing that occurred at Ferguson Market, that he was stopping these two to investigate that? The answer from the sergeant, he said he did not have that call. That call, I later found out, was given to Officer Blank. That's redacted. Question, did he know about it? Did he talk about knowing about the stealing? Answer, he did not know anything about the stealing call. Question, he told you he did not know anything about the stealing? And then it goes to the next page. He did not know anything. He was out on another call in the apartment complex adjacent to Canfield Green. Okay, so then when he's stopping these two, it is strictly about the sidewalk. It has nothing to do with him investigating the stealing of cigarillos. Is that correct? Answer, that is correct. So this Ferguson police sergeant, the first one who was on the scene and the first one to talk to Officer Wilson, specifically says that Officer Wilson said that he didn't know about the call. And then actually, if you go to page 57 and 58 here, you can see the prosecutor tries to clear it up. This is from Prosecutor Kathy Elisaday trying to clear up that previous questioning from Sheila Worley, the other prosecutor. So I want to also clarify something else, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but it was along the same lines. You testified that when Sheila asked you some questions, Miss Worley, that Officer Wilson did not know about the stealing that was going on or had just occurred at Ferguson Market. And then further down on page 58, now my question to you is this: are you saying that because he told you he didn't know about it, or are you saying that because He didn't mention it to you when you were talking to him. He did not mention it to me again. I learned about it at a later time. Has he ever told you, yeah, I didn't know anything about what happened at the market? Yes, he has told me that in subsequent conversations. He told you he didn't know about there being a stealing at the Ferguson market? Correct. So that couldn't be any clearer than, actually, you can see the prosecutor there is cross-examining that sergeant pretty vigorously to try to make it sound like, oh, he didn't tell you, but he might have known about it. He just didn't tell you. But he said, no, he told me he didn't know. So it couldn't be much clearer than he specifically told me he didn't know about the stealing at Ferguson Market. But that didn't stop Officer Darren Wilson from testifying several times in his own testimony that he did know about the stealing at the Ferguson Market. Here, starting on this is page 202 of that volume 5 there. You can see Officer Darren Wilson, question from the prosecutor, okay, did you get any calls between that time you were at a sick baby call, which is why he was out there at the Canfield Apartments, and your interaction with Michael Brown and Dorian Johnson? And his answer, while I was on the sick call case, a call came out for stealing in progress from the local market on West Florissant that the suspect's traveling toward QT. I didn't hear the entire call. I was on my portable radio, which isn't exactly the best. I did hear that a suspect was wearing a black shirt and that a box of cigarillos was stolen. Okay, and this was your call, and no, it was not my call. I just heard the call. So you can see already on page 202 of the transcript, he's claiming that he did hear the call, and he mentions it several times. Here, I'm going to go over now to page 209 of the transcript. You can see this is, when I started looking at Brown, this is Darren Wilson's testimony. First thing I noticed, in his right hand, his hand is full of cigarillos. And that's when it clicked for me, because I now saw the cigarillos. I looked in my mirror. I did a double check that Johnson was wearing a black shirt. These are the two from the stealing. And then they kept walking. So he specifically says that after they started talking, but before there was any violence, that he put together the cigarillos and the black shirt and the stealing at the Ferguson Market, even though I showed you he told that sergeant that he didn't know about the stealing at all during the entire encounter. But there's almost no cross-examination on that. Here, I'll show you again on page 234 of the transcript. When the prosecutor says, okay, you never did talk to him, Michael Brown, about the cigarillos or stealing at the Ferguson Market. No, I never had the chance to. And then, so they bring that up again, the prosecutors, the fact that he never asked Michael Brown about that. And then over on page 240 of the transcript, he's claiming that he said on the radio, Frank 21, I'm on Canfield with 2, send me another car, although that was never received by the dispatcher. In another part of the transcript, he says he had it on the wrong channel. And then the question is, it wasn't a stressful situation at that point? Answer, no, it wasn't. But I just had that gut feeling that someone else needed to be there, and knowing that this guy just stole from the market because I saw the cigarillos and had the black shirt, I felt that in order to effect the arrest, it would be better to have you ask for this other car before any words were exchanged. No, he'd already said, fuck what you have to say. So you can see he brings up the market and the cigarillos again on that part of the transcript. And then on page 253 and 254, you see this answer. Whenever they walk me, and I saw the cigarillos, I'd already saw that Dorian Johnson had on a black shirt. But just to double check myself to match up with what I had heard, cigarillos had been stolen and suspect wearing a black shirt, I looked to make sure the shirt was black. And that's where he's talking about what he saw in his rear view mirror. And the last part of the transcript I want to show, this is the only place where the prosecutors bring up what that sergeant said, and they don't use it to impeach him at all. They actually try to make it sound like it's a misunderstanding. It says, you didn't say anything to blank about the cigarillos, did you? And this, from the context, this page 257, if you look back on 256, you'll see from the context they're talking about the sergeant. And you didn't say anything about the cigarillos, did you? Yes. You believe you did? Yes, ma'am. So he's actually, on that page, Officer Darren Wilson is claiming he told the sergeant about the cigarillos and the whole stealing thing, even though the sergeant explicitly said that he told him he didn't know about it, and they never cross-examined him on that. And I showed you, he told the grand jury like at least half a dozen times that he thought about that convenience store robbery, and that these two were the suspects, as he thought about that during the encounter. He saw the cigarillos. There's this one really weird part where he says that when Michael Brown was like punching him, he stopped punching him, handed the cigarillos over to his friend, and then went back and started punching him again. That's one of the kind of unbelievable things in Officer Darren Wilson's story. And one reason I think that this idea that he's a wanted suspect in a convenience store strong arm robbery is really important is because of this weird legal jury instruction that the prosecutors gave to the grand jury. I'm not going to show you a clip, but I put a link down in the video description to this Lawrence O'Donnell MSNBC show Last Word, a segment he did on the shocking mistake in the Darren Wilson grand jury, where he talks about how the prosecutors told the grand jury for almost the entire time that they were deliberating and before Darren Wilson testified that the Missouri law for use of force says that officers can shoot fleeing felons, even though that was found unconstitutional by the Supreme Court in 1985. But they gave them this really old copy of the law that still had the part that said, that had been struck down by the Supreme Court, saying police were justified in using force in shooting fleeing felons, which isn't true. And it could be the reason that Darren Wilson spent so much time talking about how he knew that Michael Brown had been involved in this felony strong arm robbery of the convenience store, even though he told that sergeant, who was the first one on the scene, that he didn't know about the stealing call or the robbery call from the convenience store. So anyway, I hope that all that talking and all those pages from the grand jury transcript were worth the time to show how there was definitely a lack of cross-examination and real problems with the prosecutor. And I really wish that this had been in a public, at least a preliminary hearing, if not a trial. I think the evidence would have been examined a lot more closely, and there hopefully the prosecutors wouldn't have been able to get away with what they got away with in front of the grand jury. That is all even evident from the transcripts. It's nothing like what a prosecutor normally does. But I want to know what you think. Does this example and others show the prosecutors did a bad job of cross-examining Officer Darren Wilson during his 4 hours of testimony before the grand jury? And based on just the transcripts, is there significant evidence Officer Darren Wilson lied about knowing of the store theft before he shot and killed Michael Brown?
YouTube, you decide.